was a time when I felt like insects were pouring out of my head.
My parents were like aliens.
I was squarely in the land of deep psychosis.
The voice would say scream, I would scream. The voice would say shout profanity, I would shout profanity.
You know, sitting in a corner, shaking, believing that alien beings were gonna put daggers in my head.
I thought it would be fun to go swim in the East River. So I went for a swim in the East River. Police came, ambulance, everything.
I could feel the presence of like wild dogs like nipping at me and like barking at me.
It's weird having thoughts that aren't your own. It's stressful, it's scary, and sometimes terrifying.
What it looked like on the outside was probably me being laughing or crying or talking to myself.
Psychosis is not like an on-off switch, but like a dimmer.
All of a sudden, everything that I knew was gone, taken from me.
So about a month after I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I started to realize that I was hearing voices. Something was wrong. I had a brain disease and I needed help.
My experience of psychosis is sort of like a waking nightmare. You sort of got all the terror and all the fear, but you can't just sit up and open your eyes and make it all go away.
Best treatments were never really discussed. After 36 to 48 hours in that psychiatric ward, the doctor determined that I was permanently and totally disabled and that this was functionally the end of my life.
First 2 days I was hospitalized, I was restrained 20 hours a day. The next 3 weeks, 5 to 15 hours a day. I mean, for years I had nightmares about being restrained.
So how was I going to survive? I couldn't talk to people because I was too scared to talk to people. I wouldn't have survived.
And a lot of these doctors who had spent time treating people with severe mental illness were amazed because they were under the impression, even as doctors, that people with schizophrenia don't get better.
I say this to families all the time, you have reason to have hope. We have tools, we have treatments, we have community resources.
Reason to have hope. That's a conviction shared by a growing number of medical experts in addressing patients and family members struggling with the horror of psychotic disorders and serious mental illness, or SMI.
But today, more patients and families are finding a path to life-saving, meaningful recovery from these frightful and still stigmatizing neurological diseases. Hi, I'm Brooke Adams.
And I'm Tony Shalhoub. My wife, Brooke, and I have personally witnessed just how devastating serious mental illness can be for families and their loved ones.
What you just heard were the voices of real people expressing what a psychotic experience felt like to them. Most are patients of doctors Robert Laitman and Ann Mandel Laitman. We will be hearing from them and their families how meaningful recovery from SMI can be and is a reality.
They have been empowered by a protocol of the effective administration of Clozapine, family support, wraparound community care, and exercise.
And authorities like Drs. Xavier Amador, Ken Duckworth, Jeffrey Lieberman, Jonathan Meyer, Fuller Torrey, and Elyn Saks will also help to address the barriers and solutions for finding effective care for some 14 million Americans still suffering from SMI.
Brooke and I are now pleased to present Into the Light, Meaningful Recovery from Psychosis. Saturday morning, Dr. Laitman leads an early morning run for the annual gathering that he and his wife, Dr. Ann Mandel Laitman, are hosting for patients, family members, and associates.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, we're gonna have a huge party today.
The families gathered here share experiences and personal stories of how they and their loved ones are faring in their quest for a meaningful recovery from schizophrenia and major psychotic disorders.
There were numerous people there that I've interacted with on social media that I hadn't had a chance to actually meet in person with.
When it started originally, I had no idea what was happening. So I took her to her general doctor.
They had questions about their children's medicine or about their child's recovery.
When I hear that people are on the medications that just quiet them and work on the dopamine and really suppress the ability to be happy, I want to cry.
After a few visits, she told me that she thinks that she's schizophrenic. And of course, that's something that no parent really wants to hear. Still, until you actually go through it, the experience, you have no idea.
And then you look at them and you think, what's going on in there? You know what I mean? And like, are they suffering? Is he screaming inside of his head? And you don't know.
Some, such as the Laitmans, experienced early signs of problems in their young son Daniel.
But we had him seeing a psychologist very early on.
He was 9 years old, and he'd come out of the therapist, and the therapist would tell you nothing. He's 9 years old. What secrets do you think you're keeping?
When I was a kid, my dad forced me to play soccer. I would not play. I would stare at leaves on the field.
We were told that this is attention deficit disorder, and we went along with it because, again, we were not. I'm an internist, I'm a nephrologist.
But for other parents, their child's future looked bright with no hint or clue of the gathering storm clouds.
Well, you know, everybody always talks about the signs and the indicators of something going wrong. Nick really wasn't like that. He was kind of the golden child. He got good grades, he had lots of friends, he was very talented in art. It all kind of hit suddenly when he reached his teens.
I grew up in Manhattan. I went to elementary school and junior high school there. I had friends.
My childhood was good. I lived in the country.
He was always a very gifted student. He was a great kid at an early age, very athletic.
He was very, very talented. Smart boy, very smart kid.
He was athletic, he was very charming, he was popular with the girls, he was just the apple of everyone's eye.
I was going to school full time.
She was doing well, always involved in everything. As soon as she graduated from high school, she went to San Jose State University.
I got to travel all over the place, and all over Belgium, Italy, England, Amsterdam, all over Europe. So I had a really great high school years.
And my dream was, for a long time, was to become a professional violinist. When I was 13 years old, I started practicing the violin for 4 hours a day. And that same year, I was accepted as a student of a music conservatory professor at the Cleveland Institute of Music.
But when does the normal go into the abnormal in a young woman like Bethany, who is so driven and accomplishing so much?
Typically, children exhibit disturbing symptoms that are precursors of oncoming psychosis, called the prodrome. These symptoms can last for a few weeks or up to several years.
I was really in denial. First signs that we saw looking back were an abrupt change in his grades. So he was in National Junior Honor Society and middle school, and at the end of 7th grade leading up to 8th grade, there was a huge drop in his grades and his motivation. He became defiant. He started sneaking out of the house at night, but he wasn't meeting with people or going to parties. He was walking around in sometimes scary neighborhoods, and we didn't quite understand what was going on. We were asking him how he felt, and he just kept saying how stressed he was, and the anxiety just kept building and building and building.
In the early stages, I had trouble with my cognition. I started having trouble with the relationships that I was in, friendships. I started isolating. And my parents knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what it was.
And she says, "Can't you see my thoughts leaving me? And they're going away." I was distraught, grieving the loss of my daughter.
It was January. It was frigid. And he's in shorts and a t-shirt, no shoes, and just cleaning up twigs.
So he was drinking himself into oblivion. He was slicing his arms. He was burning himself. And he was coming back 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We had no idea what did we do? He's going to kill himself.
Well, there was a suicide attempt. And when that happened, we realized we had to take it seriously. This wasn't just an ornery teenager. This was somebody in trouble.
I didn't really start to descend into schizophrenia until I started having delusions, which probably started about my 3rd year at USC.
So I experience a condition where I feel like everyone can hear my thoughts. It's a real condition. Lots of people experience it.
He was starting to display paranoid thinking. He was having delusions. And that is when I realized that he probably had schizophrenia like my father did.
We didn't even know he was psychotic the second time he wound up in the hospital because I didn't really even know what to look for.
Well, when I was at my very darkest, I was at a mental hospital that usually the longest stay is supposed to be 2 weeks, and I ended up being there 2.5 months. And I remember just being so low because I had no idea what my future would hold.
He did have to be hospitalized a few times, and most of the time it was involuntary.
So during my whole duration studying at USC and then becoming homeless for 4 years, I had what is called anosognosia, complete lack of insight, no idea that anything was wrong.
She said that she wasn't sick, that this was a mistake.
And then that day, March 3rd, 2007, I was picked up by police because I had been screaming at the top of my lungs at these voices, which were the most annoying stimulus I could ever imagine.
And it was when we had answering machines and the light was blinking. And we answered it, and it was LAPD calling to let us know that our daughter had been picked up by police and taken to psychiatric hospital for evaluation. And it was hospital social worker let us know that Bethany's condition, it looked like she'd been on the street a long time.
We didn't know what was going on, and it was terrifying. No one expects this to happen.
There was a time when Michael was really, really ill. I thought to myself, if I would have known that my child was going to suffer the way that he is suffering, I would have never had children. To bring children into the world with this terrible diagnosis looming over them, it's just cruel.
I couldn't even take walks because the voices in my head, every time I'd go on a walk, they'd get loud and they'd start being really mean to me. So I got really depressed. I wasn't able to have any friends. So I did try to take all of my pills at once one day.
Michael had gotten so sick that he had told me, "Mom, my life is not worth living. I feel hopeless." I'm so miserable. I'm suffering so badly that I just wish I wasn't here.
We had to involuntarily commit him because he was aggressive in the house. He was throwing phones and he was kicking holes in doors and punching the walls and stuff.
You know, it's like once you have the helicopters above your house and the lights everywhere and the police are leading your son out in handcuffs, it's a little hard to pretend. And at that point, stigma really doesn't matter anymore.
Eventually, the shit just hit the fan, and it must have been horrifying for my family to just see me enter that period of darkness and to have me there, but just out of reach.
We would never let him out of our sights. We hid the knives. He was actively suicidal.
Our child is not going to be a homeless person on the street. That's not going to happen. And that's really where we started this journey.
The Laitmans would ensure that their son would not be homeless, but for too many hospitalized for psychotic breakdowns, the prognosis was disarmingly grim.
After 36 to 48 hours in that psychiatric ward, the doctor determined that I was permanently and totally disabled and that this was functionally the end of my life, that I might live in halfway houses and group homes or perhaps never live apart from family, that I would not work, that I would never go back to school.
At first it was really hard to accept a diagnosis of schizophrenia. The doctors told me, you have schizophrenia, you're not going to be able to live, by yourself. You might be able to have a little job. You'll always need to be in treatment.
So I was told that I had a serious psychotic illness and that it would be with me all my life and I should lower my expectations, not plan to go back to school, maybe work for a while as a cashier to get my occupational feet wet.
The doctors told us to grieve the loss, to lower our expectations, and that this wasn't the person we thought we had. And that's pretty difficult to hear.
Do you realize that the stress that you've gone through is so severe that it would be classed like being in a prison camp that actually shrinks brain tissue? Was it that bad? As parents, you push it aside.
And if the prognosis wasn't bad enough, the prescribed meds would make a patient not only not feel better, but too often worse.
They tried Thorazine, they tried Stelazine, they gave me Mellaril, and to be quite honest, the medication's side effects were worse than the symptoms of the illness. They made me feel like a zombie. I lacked motivation to do anything. They just totally deadened everything.
So he went through a lot of medications and finally settled on lithium and Zyprexa. And this was considered a success because it went away, but he was a zombie.
So when I did take the Haldol shot, my arms kind of contracted, is that the right word? And I couldn't move them. They were it was hard to even stretch out my hands.
He went through 13 different antipsychotics, numerous mood stabilizers, antidepressants. Nothing seemed to help. They might help for a couple days, but then they actually seemed to make him worse.
But mostly what I experienced from the Haldol shot was hallucinations, and lots of them. I thought there was bugs in the ceiling that were going to eat my brain.
So yes, he would be laying there looking like he was sleeping or trying to rest. His eyes would just be open. So, he just wasn't really able to function at all on it. But it wasn't a problem. He wasn't out bothering people. And so they thought, that's good enough.
I think a lot of psychiatrists have expectations that in my mind are way too low. That if you're treating somebody and they're not being disruptive or wandering out into the street and being homeless and they're staying out of the hospital, that's good enough. I call it good enough treatment. Well, good enough treatment isn't good enough for me.
This doctor said if she doesn't take her meds, you better grieve her because she's dead.
And it was her birthday when he said that.
It's basically a death sentence, you know, that there would be no hope.
I think a while ago it was considered a death sentence. But now I don't think so. I think everybody can live a life.
When it came to prescribing an antipsychotic medication, one stood out and was proven to work better than the others.
Deborah Levy, of all the clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, she was the most important person. She was the first person that looked at Daniel, said he's, at that point, was on 3 different antipsychotics, looked terrible, looked like Frankenstein's monster, no facial expression, shuffling along, could barely walk across the street, really hearing voices all the time, constantly muttering to himself. I said, look, he needs to be on Clozapine. Get him on Clozapine.
Dr. Nasrallah encouraged me to start a rarely used medication, which I'd never even heard of, called Clozapine.
And finally, after 13 failed antipsychotics, I had found some recovery stories online, and they all shared a common theme. All of the patients took Clozapine. So I'd asked his doctors if they would prescribe Clozapine, and they all said no.
Some people with schizophrenia have to have an advocate for them because they are not able to articulate or even know how to help themselves.
And they would ask Michael, do you want to take this? Do you want to take Clozapine? Do you think your medications are working? Well, his cognitive function was so poor that it was like asking a 2 or 3-year-old what they wanted to do. He had no idea what was even going on. He was so lost in his delusion.
They said that they were going to take me to court if I didn't take the medication. So my parents did a lot of research on what the best treatments for schizophrenia were, and they found out about Clozapine. Nothing really helped until the Clozapine.
Once I got interested in schizophrenia, it became very clear that there was only one effective medication for treatment-resistant schizophrenia, which was Clozapine.
One of my first exposures to Clozapine, I was on a research team studying the reintroduction of Clozapine here in the States. And a very famous Harvard professor said to me, you see that man? That man's never going to get out of the hospital. I got the man on Clozapine as part of this research trial, and he's living in the community within 3 months. And it was an interesting moment for me because the man who said that statement to me was brilliant and is a Harvard professor and didn't appreciate the power potential of Clozapine.
18 years that Nick was sick, nobody even mentioned Clozapine to us. It wasn't until I met Elyn Saks, who is a law professor at USC and has schizophrenia herself, that I learned about Clozapine. And that was when I began to investigate it.
So I learned everything I possibly could. And so, of course, I learned about Clozapine. And I went to our community mental health center, and I asked the doctor about Clozapine, and she said, no, that's a very dangerous drug. We only use that as a last resort.
And the concept that it's the last resort really is not evidence-based. It'd be like telling somebody who has cancer, well, there's one drug for which there's a 50% response rate, but I don't know how to use it, and all I know are the side effects, therefore I'm not going to give it to you. Well, that's just not acceptable in 2022 if you're treating schizophrenia patients.
Not acceptable because to doctors like Duckworth, Laitman, Lieberman, and Meyer, research had clearly shown that Clozapine has a strong track record dating back decades.
You know, people think Clozapine is the drug of last resort. They all go back to these initial studies. They forget the literature. People were showing benefit of Clozapine in 1966. It was outperforming all the neuroleptics that are out there.
So if you take all of the 30-odd antipsychotic drugs that are marketed currently,
and you then try and rank them based on their efficacy or their side effects. Okay, now clozapine has the biggest efficacy difference.
Lieberman came in and did a study showing the neutropenia was not as big a problem. And that led to our remediation medical side effects and the demand for doing the testing every week.
Clozapine actually reduces mortality. People think it's the opposite because they focus on neutropenia risk. Well, very few people in developed countries actually die from neutropenia. I looked up the number recently when I published the Clozapine handbook, 0.013%. It's minuscule.
Now, I think it's been underutilized because of a unfounded fear of agranulocytosis.
If clozapine is so dangerous, then why do patients taking clozapine live, on average, 10 years longer than any other antipsychotic? Why is the overall mortality rate so much less? It doesn't make any sense.
So if clozapine is not as dangerous as commonly believed and proven most effective for psychotic disorders, why aren't doctors prescribing it more often?
Why aren't they? Well, it's because doctors either find it to be a hassle or are timid in terms of avoiding medical legal complications. And so I think it's shameful.
And we were fortunate that John Kane in New York did that pivotal study which showed that clozapine was effective for people with treatment-resistant schizophrenia.
And that was the first time people ever talked about resistant schizophrenia.
You have to, for one thing, let them know that they're treatment resistant, that the chances of response to anything else are virtually zero, certainly under 9%, and that the best option for them is clozapine, so they can make a truly informed decision. And most importantly, you have to know how to prescribe it.
Clozapine is the one drug, the one antipsychotic that actually has the FDA indication for suicide prevention.
On the other hand, individuals with schizophrenia sadly will die by suicide or other unnatural causes, and a lot of that can be prevented by using clozapine. So in the long run, clozapine actually saves lives.
Clozapine is not only essential to decreasing suicide, it also has a great impact on reducing aggressive behavior. Studies have verified that clozapine has the highest efficacy in reducing the number and severity of aggressive incidents in patients.
1 in 6 individuals will have this episode of serious violence with harm to an individual. And you know where that harm is more often directed than not? At families.
As Dr. Fuller Torrey writes in his groundbreaking book, Surviving Schizophrenia, it is true that most individuals with schizophrenia are not dangerous. But as Dr. Laitman reminds us, potential violence remains a concern in cases involving poorly treated psychotic patients.
I am a chemical and biomedical engineer. I first learned about Team Daniel after my loved one developed schizophrenia. And I learned that there's a lot of families like mine.
Rachel's statistical analysis obtained from a study of 180 patients of Dr. Laitman's focused on the efficacy, side effects, and amelioration of clozapine.
I offered to become the data analyst for Team Daniel. And when I compiled all of the patient data, I was shocked. There was an overwhelming reduction in substance use disorders.
Schizophrenia increases your risk for substance use disorders. There's something about the neurobiology.
It reduces frequency of relapse, reduces frequency of substance abuse.
Disproportionate numbers of people with schizophrenia smoke cigarettes, but they use all substances, even ones which may make their positive symptoms worse, like cannabis or amphetamines or cocaine.
Clozapine has a record of reducing incidents of substance abuse and violence, but one complaint by patients and doctors still remains common: debilitating side effects.
Well, a lot of what we do is addressing side effects of clozapine. So nobody was using this medicine correctly. They were letting kids gain weight and have gastrointestinal reflux, heartburn, and all the saliva at night. You would hear Daniel choking at night and coughing, and nobody had any idea what to do with it.
It's a remarkable drug. It like a lot of medicines, it has side effects that need to be managed. But, when you get a life versus, meaningful life versus just a life being riddled with whatever kinds of negative thoughts and hallucinations, for many people, it's an easy choice.
And we know how to manage the adverse effects. Yes, they might be serious. And I think over time, our hope is to try to let these people know that you cannot tell patients things which are not true.
My loved one gained 75 pounds on the initial antipsychotic medications. Weight gain, it's always a big concern for this patient population, and it's not unique to clozapine. In fact, on the weight gain is actually worse over time.
And I've had more than one patient over the years say, okay, fine, I gained weight on clozapine, but I'd rather have a mind that I can work on my body.
The other reason it's grossly underutilized is that the patent has been up for decades now. Now, why does that matter? And it's because we have multi-billion-dollar industries promoting their branded, patented medications.
It's not a new treatment, so you're not going to see an ad on TV in the Super Bowl.
They're always selling this, they're selling that, they're looking for the easy pill.
Because number one, they want to prescribe what the drug companies are pushing for money. That's number one for sure. Oh, we have now. I think let's try Lance on. Well, that didn't work. I mean, nothing worked.
And Lou Opler, basically documented why it got abandoned, because it was not lucrative enough. And that's the only reason it was abandoned.
The late Dr. Lou Opler was also instrumental in helping the Laitmans understand the multiple benefits of treating psychotic spectrum disorders with clozapine. So much so that they partnered on a book together, Meaningful Recovery from Schizophrenia and Serious Mental Illness with Clozapine, helped a new generation of patients and their families turn to the gold standard for recovery.
And the doctor said, okay. So we started him on clozapine. And the very lowest dose on the very first night, Michael did better on clozapine than he did on any of his previous medications.
When I started clozapine, I started just hearing one voice. He would not be mean to me. He would be nice to me.
I was happy that he was on clozapine because compared to all of the other medications, it was a miracle.
And after I got on clozapine, after about a month, I saw some serious improvement. Again, I had been on 5 medications, 1 to 2 at a time for 12 months. And none of these medications had silenced the voices inside of my mind. They were there with me all the time, 24/7, very, very loud.
Daniel started clozapine, and it really took about 6 months for him to get tremendously better, but that was because he's on the other antipsychotics.
Honestly, the schizophrenia doesn't go away completely. Like, I still hear things, I still hear voices, but it's manageable.
After 6 months on clozapine, suddenly not only could I read, but I was able to study. And I was able to play the violin again, too, at a pretty high level. So after that, about a year went by, and we started making plans, and I started to enjoy my life again.
If I hadn't found effective medication, I think that I would have been unable to, develop the good things in my life that I have been able to develop.
When they finally get on clozapine, the light comes back on. They become more animated, more expressive. Some doctors call this an awakening effect.
For patients like Elyn Saks and Bethany Yeiser, clozapine did have an awakening effect. But far too many others faced persistent barriers to receiving and remaining on clozapine.
And as I had read, and I'd seen these kids get better with clozapine, and Daniel get better with clozapine, and then, better and better, we started to reach out. So I started to reach out to NAMI, and I started to go to the conventions.
NAMI needed to form as a support, advocacy, and education organization. It's critical to the development of NAMI.
And at the same time, I met DJ Jaffe, and DJ introduced me to Fuller Torrey.
Probably the person that's had the greatest impact on for the good is Fuller Torrey. So Fuller Torrey started out as a researcher. He also had a family member with schizophrenia. He realized what a horrible situation there was in terms of people with schizophrenia finding care.
One of Fuller Torrey's many contributions, establishing the Treatment Advocacy Center.
Treatment Advocacy Center is to advocate anything that's going to improve the treatment for people with serious mental illnesses, whether it's better use of clozapine or whether it's laws or whatever it is, getting people out of jail who shouldn't be in jail. All of these are covered by the Treatment Advocacy Center.
Because that's the other big barrier is, one, right, you protect the patient's rights, but two, the hiding behind HIPAA.
Oh, HIPAA is terrible.
Yes.
HIPAA's just been a terrible problem. Day one.
People with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all the neurological disorders have the right to be sick. And schizophrenia, bipolar are really neurological illnesses. And they have the right to treatment.
I find it to be very difficult because I completely get the requirement that an individual, in some sense, in our society in particular, has the right to control their medical information.
He's not suicidal, he's not homicidal, he's psychotic, but he has the right to be psychotic. But I don't agree with that.
Unfortunately, we've seen the consequences when information is not appropriately shared that really impacts life and death in some of these situations.
I remember a couple of instances in which HIPAA was a real barrier. A man refused all treatment, very psychotic. He refused to sign a release allowing us to talk with his mother. His mother knew he was there. He got discharged and within weeks stabbed her to death.
I think it's overused as a concept to not share information. If a person gives permission to share information, that is considered an ongoing permission. So I think a lot of people don't know that. And you can always give information to a care provider.
The laws need to change. The culture needs to change. But we all have to do something.
It is critical to address and change laws related to HIPAA. Overcoming many barriers to effective treatment is also crucial to receiving beneficial care. Several government programs and organizations are integral to helping families find and fight for meaningful reforms.
Do you think we ever could get a national comprehensive, assisted outpatient therapy, court-mandated treatment? Do you think it's doable?
At the national level, I think it's unlikely, partly because of the states' rights issue.
AOT is assisted outpatient treatment, and it is mandated outpatient treatment, usually through court orders.
AOT came about under Pendra's law. We see it as a tool to help people who are struggling with serious mental health issues, who are placing themselves or others at risk.
It's especially designed for patients who have a long history of not believing that they're sick, thus not cooperating with treatment.
We also know that from the time a person experiences their first mental health symptom, there's an 11-year span till they actually get help and treatment. And when you think about it, if you have a broken leg or other health issue, we typically don't wait 10, 11 years. But with mental health, for some reason, which we can talk more about, stigma and access to services becomes an issue.
While efforts continue to change laws and policies that are barriers to finding meaningful recovery, greater support for community services is also vital, such as assertive community treatment, or ACT.
ACT is assertive community treatment, and it's basically on the team there's a psychiatrist, I'm the social worker and the family therapist, and then there's a vocational specialist, there's a case manager, there's a substance abuse specialist, there are 2 nurses, and then there's the team leader. So that's an ACT team, and we go out and see people in the community with mental illness.
It works. People learn to manage their own illness experience, the families are engaged, and assertive community treatment, which is you take a whole treatment team out of the hospital for people that are ill.
So it's our job to try and keep them out of the hospital, help monitor their medication, help them develop meaningful life goals, help people develop strengths, encourage people to work, go to school, and have some structure in their life.
You know, people with schizophrenia and related disorders are among the loneliest people I've ever met, especially if they have anosognosia, because everyone's telling them they've got a problem and they're certain they don't. And so being surrounded by family and community in a way where they feel accepted and not judged is vital, and it's key to their acceptance of treatment, even though they don't understand they're ill.
Everyone needs support. The patient themselves needs support from caregivers. If they're fortunate enough to have family involved, that's great. Sometimes many patients do not, but whatever support can be given to them, as I said, encouraging them through the initial process of the clozapine titration and managing adverse effects, maybe connecting them with other people who've been on clozapine.
So we need to have much more of that experience available for people with schizophrenia, where they feel loved, they feel listened to, and cared about, that their experience is something that their loved ones care about.
Relationships give your life kind of a meaning and a depth, but they also serve another set of eyes if you start slipping.
The key is at NAMI, when you do family and family, people say, "Oh my God, thank you. I am not alone."
I've made a few friends through Dr. Laitman, some really close friends, and spending time with them and talking with them really helps me when I'm at a low point. We go out, we go for walks, we go out to eat. I guess you could sum it up by hanging out.
Can't just be a doctor prescribing a pill and a therapist talking to a person. There's multiple needs.
And so the notion of integrated wraparound support is really a reflection that medicine alone is insufficient for most people.
You may need some type of cognitive remediation. You may need case management because of the fact that you have to navigate a Byzantine system for getting Medicaid or SSI benefits.
Because if we're going to change this approach, embracing the family, getting the support structure together, showing that serious mental illness, one of my favorite expressions, a team sport. You need the support, you need the engagement. And there's Bill Rodgers, whom I had met on the starting line at Disney, because Bill looked at my shirt, and because I had my Team Daniels shirt, running for recovery from mental illness. He goes, "What's this all about?" And so we started the chat, and he says, my grandmother had schizophrenia.
But, you know, we got to know each other over the years.
And so Bill Rodgers became one of our spokesmen.
It's kind of hidden. The issue of mental illness hasn't been dealt with really too well.
No.
And we're starting, I think, as a country to take a look at how we can do better. How can we move to a society where it's prevention is everything?
Exercising, it really is a missing component. You know, it's the magic bullet. I always tell people, I say, Clozapine's great. It allows you to get better, but then you got to do the work. And part of the work is being physically active.
Exercise makes me feel really good. Not only does it keep me on track as far as health-wise, I know running If I'm stressed or feel anxiety or I'm tired, if I go for a 45-minute run or a spin class, I'll feel so much better.
You need the exercise, you need the diet, you need the normalizing. These people have been isolated and by themselves.
It's one of the most beautiful feelings that I've ever experienced, because even when like I'm at a really rough time, going through a tough time, and I do not want to run, once I begin and get a couple miles in, my mind just feels so much more fresh, and I feel like I'm ready to take on more challenges.
Not only did running help Dr. Laitman manage an episode of depression at an early age, it also helped develop a broader protocol for recovery beyond clozapine.
And one day I said to him, "You're running for all of these other things, but maybe you should run for mental illness since that's impacted our family so much." And we kind of brainstormed about it and we decided Team Daniel.
So it became a community where people would come to our houses on Saturday, and that was great because it normalized relationships, incredibly important for the therapeutic relationship with the kids.
I think you're providing a model much more widely for how clozapine can be used and should be used.
In order to achieve the best results with clozapine, Dr. Laitman summarizes his protocol with this acronym, EASE, as follows.
E, early use of clozapine.
A, aggressive side effect management with rational pharmacology, aggressive monitoring of clozapine levels for optimized treatment.
S, slow titration of medication to minimize side effects.
And E, engagement and medication compliance from patients while receiving active family support.
And we were just so upset at the general psychiatric community, the general treatment. We just wanted people to use clozapine.
It's bringing people together, whether it's on Facebook, national Zoom calls, inviting people over to their home. It's destigmatizing, it's enforcing and reinforcing connection.
I feel like we have the knowledge of better ways to do it, but we do have to create funding streams and a workforce that is able to do it.
This is such a slow process. It's really funny. We get these messages from parents. 2 weeks, he's better. I go, no. He may be a little better than he was, but this is going to be a long and bumpy road.
The ultimate goal, meaningful recovery from psychosis, will vary from person to person and family to family. But it's a goal that needs to be shared by the entire medical psychiatric community.
I'm grateful for where he is today, but it's not anything you expect. When we were going to the psych ward and being buzzed in through the double doors, like as if we were criminals, our friends were going to their kids' law school graduation, or they were going to the maternity ward to see their grandchildren. And, it's very hard, it's very worrisome, but he's warm and he's loving.
Since he's gotten on clozapine, he's finding himself again. He's painting again. It doesn't look like the paintings he did before he had schizophrenia, but he is painting, and that's really something big.
I feel like we have our son back and my children have their brother back. He's able to go on family vacations, play games with the family, even work part-time. It's as if a light has just come on in his eyes. It has been nothing short of a true awakening.
My definition of a meaningful recovery is that the person is engaged in activity that matters to them, that they're involved in meaningful activity as they define it, and that they're functioning in basic ways, right? They're not getting caught up in the criminal justice system. They're not homeless. They have a roof over their head. They have food.
We're seeing in Matt a return to a more normal social behavior. He's reaching out to friends again.
Yeah.
He's making new friends.
Dr. Laitman was
what helped me turn the corner, but really it was everything. After working with them and getting on the medication regimen I'm on now, that's saved my life, really.
I love it, especially because of the fact I have Yona Schimmel's Knishes right over there. So when I worked at New York Comedy Club 4th Street, I would just like go over there, grab a Knish, grab a coffee. I'm living the life.
For some parents, the goal is to restore their child's capacity to experience family relationships in a healthy way. For others, it has allowed the realization of achievements most doctors and families never really thought possible.
And I was given a full scholarship to Dominican College, where I finished my bachelor's, and then I went to Columbia for my master's in social work.
I have a few ideas, but my first step after community college is to transfer to a 4-year SUNY university.
Erica is now more outgoing. She visits with friends. She's holding a job, volunteers twice a week in a church. I can definitely say she's living a meaningful life.
It's just this beautiful, vibrant scene, and everybody's sort of like chasing a dream, and it's very cool.
So the components that have helped me in my journey to recovery, I would say a support group for sure, the right medicine. My biggest advocate is my mom.
He's going to have a meaningful life. His focus has changed. It used to be engineering and computers, but now it's social work because he's found his niche. This is his path in life, and it's to help people.
I have friends, I see friends. I'm getting my driver's license, so I'm going to have that freedom back. I'm going to school, I'm in college. I'm studying to be a social worker. I have a job, I work in a library on campus. So things are really great.
After I graduated from Columbia, I worked for Pathways to Housing, which is a program for homeless people with mental illness to have their own apartment. And, basically the philosophy was, how do you cure homelessness? You give them a home, you give them a place to live. I may not have told people about my experiences or shared, the mental diagnosis that I've had, but I definitely brought with me the ability to understand what people go through.
Clozapine and family support not only enable Bethany Yeiser to earn an undergraduate degree, but also to publish a book and help create CURESZ, a growing national organization that is helping others realize their meaningful recovery through clozapine and community support systems.
So I wanted to prove that people do recover from schizophrenia and thrive and move on with their lives. So I started featuring stories of people I found. These are remarkable people. We have nurses, accountants, engineers, social workers, librarians.
Like, emotional growth does not come easy to me. But I'm getting there. I'm getting towards being an actual adult. I'm starting to be more self-sufficient, and I'm getting better. It was a big step, but now it's like, oh, cool, I'm living on my own. I have a career, and life is good.
Everyone put your hands together, make some noise for the OG, Daniel Laitman, making his way to the stage.
Who in here hates their boss? Yeah. I hate my boss, I'm self-employed.
Recovery happens. I see it happen all the time. It is possible. If you're dealing with a situation where it seems completely impossible, you're not talking to enough people.
So hope is it's such a critical ingredient, and just finding a way to like people, just finding a way to connect and be human.
Hope is extremely important because this is a marathon.
When you get on clozapine and you're doing better, go back to the doctor who was originally taking care of you. Go back to your previous psychiatrist and say, this is what I look like now. This is what I'm doing now that I couldn't do before.
Our kids deserve better. Our country deserves better. Our homeless, our jailed population, better treatment is out there.
This is a marathon, not a sprint. You've got to take care of yourself and talk to one another.
And like a marathon, there's points along the race that are not as easy as other points. And you just have to gut it out. And you just have to persist. You have to be relentless. And it's a lot of commitment, but it's worth it. It's the kid's life.
Worth it because it's a kid's life. A life severely impacted by the burden of serious mental illness, which in turn impacts their family as well as the community.
In other words, you, me, all of us, really.
We hope this film shines a ray of light into a better understanding of SMI.
Next time you see or hear about someone behaving in a manner you might think strange, perhaps discomforting, try for a moment to think about what they might be going through.
They deserve support. Their families deserve support. They deserve the full effort of the medical community to engage their loved ones in the best treatment possible.
As we've learned, confidence and kindness can restore lives. Our society needs to have more empathy and really should demand that appropriate resources are invested.
The lack of adequate treatment is not only a national crisis, it is a national disgrace. We can and must do so much better. All we need is the will. I'm Tony Shalhoub.
I'm Brooke Adams. We thank you for watching Into the Light, Meaningful Recovery from Psychosis.
float the hours by, the water sighs its thickest breeze, all full of smoke and tired eyes. Our drunken souls find full expression. Dawns that break with cups of tea and writing, pages 3 we open channels, miss the train, our thunderstorms chant with the rain, and I'm so grateful for the people that I love. Floating tubes of bubble soap, I'm falling fast, you throw the rope, lines around darkness like a gallows, we wait dream like in the shallows. Can you fix my broken mind? Can you find what I can't find? Warmth like magma through the cracks of shivering spines and smiling eyes, and I'm so grateful for the people that I love. I've seen that my heart, it waits for no one but you, him, my fathoms deep, my hands in my sunset.